Hi, this is Sam Woollard, and this is my personal account of my life at Harwich County High School. This DVD is dedicated to the pupils I shared those times with and who have joined with me in our reunions. But first, let's take a look back at the events which shaped our lives in the 1950s.
In 1950, Britain was working hard to rebuild at the start of the new decade and was desperate for something to boost morale. The Festival of Britain was planned as a showcase of all the best things about the country. The festival's centrepiece was the Dome of Discovery.
And this was Sam Woollard and his dad, taken in one of those photo booths in 1951.
For many Britons, the early 50s were a constant struggle to feed families with the meagre rations that were still in force. It was far from easy for large families. Parents had to juggle their working lives with bringing up children and still find time to queue for even the most basic necessities. Princess Margaret's 21st birthday was a welcome diversion and was celebrated warmly by the British people and the emerging Commonwealth. The nation had watched the royal princesses growing up through the hardship of war. They were both extremely popular. In the 50s, British people had little chance to go on exotic holidays. Camping and caravanning were the easiest way to get away from it all. Even a short break was an opportunity to have fun. On February 6, 1952, the death of the much-loved King, George VI, was an occasion of national mourning. The country was grateful for his fortitude and leadership during the war, and his young family had become hugely popular with a public who felt that they had all been through the trials of war together. By the winter of 1952, the smog problem that afflicted most of Britain's big cities finally began to be dealt with. The famous pea soupers had killed as many as 4,000 people the previous year, and the time had come to take action. Days before the coronation of the new Queen, news reached Britain from Nepal that climbers from the British expedition, led by Edmund Hillary and the Nepalese Sherpa Tenzin, had conquered Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. The conquest of Everest was perfectly timed for the coronation celebrations. Britain had high expectations in the summer of 1953, and the coronation marked the beginning of a period of optimism and achievement. The nation took the young Queen to their hearts instantly. The televised event was watched by almost 20 million people, crowding around less than 3 million TV sets. From that day, television would replace the wireless at the heart of family life in Britain.
On the night of January the 31st, 1953, Harwich people were soundly sleeping in their beds when seconds later they were fighting for their lives as seawater tore through their homes. The quay, the esplanade and 280 homes in Bathside were all flooded and the pier submerged. Tidying up started the following day, with lorries carting away mounds of sodden furniture, carpets, pianos and white goods. Caravans were sighted on St Helens Field and Barrack Field for nearly 2 years afterwards, while houses were repaired. On a happier note, Harwich and Parkston Football Club reached the FA Amateur Cup final. The game was played at Wembley on the 11th of April 1953 in front of a crowd of 100,000 people. 3 special trains and 60 coaches were provided to convey the supporters to the ground. At half-time the score was 3-0 to Pegasus, and by full-time Pegasus had added 3 more goals to win 6-0. Harwich players struggled gallantly against the university's side, and the supporters awarded the team full marks.
The feeling that Britain could compete with the best gained momentum in May 1954, when a Briton became the first man to run the mile in under 4 minutes. Roger Bannister's success gave the country another lift just a year after the coronation. Workers were laid off to make industry more competitive, and strikes were organised in protest. Britons in the mid-50s travelled by bus or train to enjoy their summer holidays. A trip to the seaside was as far as budgets would allow most British families to travel. And when they reached the coast, they stayed in boarding houses that had been built in their thousands in Victorian times. Britain's seaside resorts enjoyed an extended boom period after the war. In the air, too, Britain was looking to the future. The record-breaking Comet, the world's first jet airliner, helped to create a sense that Britain was finally on the move. More and more people were getting their first taste of a foreign country. The first common foreign destination was, not surprisingly, France, but it was all a bit different on the other side of the Channel. In 1957, Anthony Eden, the Conservative leader, retired as Prime Minister. The Suez calamity and his own ill health were thought to be responsible. Harold Macmillan became the new Prime Minister. He went on to give the late 50s their most famous soundbite, "You've never had it so good." Elvis Presley exploded onto the British music scene in the mid-50s. When he was given a European posting by the US Army, huge crowds gathered to see him at the station. Stevenage in Hertfordshire was one of a number of new towns that were built in the late 1950s. Promising families a new way of living, they were modern, functional, clean and spacious, light years away from life in Britain's city centres. In 1958, all Britain was shocked by the news that Matt Busby's acclaimed young Manchester United team had been involved in a horrific accident at Munich airport. Busby himself made a full recovery, but the tragic crash in terrible weather claimed the lives of some of the brightest football talent in the country. The Queen launched the next phase of Britain's telecommunication revolution in 1958 and clearly enjoyed herself.
The new system is called subscriber trunk dialing. Great Britain will eventually be linked by the dial we now use for local calls. The Postmaster General invited Her Majesty to make the first STD call to Edinburgh, and telephone history was made.
In the late 50s, a weird new phenomenon emerged in Britain, the teenager.
You've only got to look and listen to be quite sure that all these young people have got hep. They're most definitely with it. This is a high-class joint. But everywhere, the cats have their own little places where they live the gospel that this is the age of the teenager. Teenagers, guys and dolls, can be trained in a few weeks to earn £8 or £10 a week. The shops know it, so every town has a store with teenage departments, thriving on giving the young people the fashions they demand, distinctive teenage fashions. And if the get-up seems to border on the outlandish, why not look on them as the beginnings of something new? The gramophone industry cashes in on the well-off teenagers to some tune. 80% of the disc output is bought by the youngsters. That's 50 million records a year in Britain alone. All industry knows that to please the teenagers is the golden way to big dividends.
As well as new dance crazes and flamboyantly original fashions, 50s teenagers sported bizarre hairstyles, anything to make them stand out from the crowd.
A chap who takes pride in, shall we say, his distinctive clothing likes to cap it all with a hairstyle to match. After a shampoo, the foundations of the new creation are laid with this barber's magic wand called a blower. It seems incredible, but hair can be molded as easily as plasticine, with results just as funny to some people. To Cyril, the new style is a work of art. To the customer, it's a mark of distinction.
Britain's buoyant economy had produced an atmosphere of confidence and optimism across the whole country. Confidence brought with it new inventions, and one of the most ingenious was English designer Christopher Cockerell's hovercraft. Floating on a cushion of air, the hovercraft claimed to be the fastest way to cross the Channel. Britain was beginning to venture beyond her own shores, offering a taste of the continent to a new generation. There were more than 5.5 million private motor cars travelling on British roads by 1959. The British Motor Corporation pinned its hopes on the launch of the Mini, on sale for just over £500 and capable of 70 miles an hour.
With flyovers and more than 150 new bridges, the London-Birmingham motorway begins a new era in British travel by road.
A series of new motorways linking all Britain's cities in a giant network was planned. And the first of these, the M1, was opened in 1959.
Flyovers ensure that no traffic fights for crossing rights. This is the motoring we used to dream about.
They were bold, exciting times. At last, Britain was a nation travelling together into a bright future.
So we passed the dreaded 11 plus. Our parents signed us up, minimum of 2 years hard labour, and we made that first journey up to the towers. According to my records, on the report for the first half year, there were 35 members of Form 1A, and I presume the same number in 1B. Our form master was George Cook. I wonder who was the form master for 1B. Old friends were reunited, new friends were made, and we sat in those old wooden desks in our spankingly new expensive uniforms, all bought from Cyril Mole's tailors. And this is pretty much how the uniform looked when it was new. And yes, we wore short trousers. Just look at those legs, no wonder they called me Wickets. You have to take your time with this photo because it's the only one that I've got. It was taken at the last reunion in sections. Most of our form, from what I can see, is in the second row from the top. And I can see a bunch of boys there and girls, and of course right in the front the famous Welburn and Dilly Meacock. Oh, how I hated both of those. Probably the best thing for you to do, if your TV allows it, is just to put it on pause on each section, and then you may be able to find yourself. As a contrast, this picture shows the 32 pupils who returned to the tower in 1999 when they were close to 60 years old. 32 out of 70 was a really good turnout. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it that year. My involvement with the reunions didn't really start until the year 2004, when I was 65 years old. But it has continued ever since, and I want to share with you some of the many photographs that we've had in those different reunions. As we pan through these photos, let me just say that I have used the maiden names of all the girls, because that's the way that I remember them. I apologise for not remembering all of your married names, girls. Plenty of people in the background here, but the main character in the foreground is my old mucker Alan Dorr. And in this one we see Elizabeth Rhodes and Beryl Rycraft. Again, two people from my primary school. And here is Anne Barker and my good friend Alan Primmer. And on this one we see in the front Leslie Carver, and again Liz and Beryl. And here are three wives. Terry Keir's wife, the late Dot Clifford, and my wife Hilary. And on the far left here is Alan Dorr's wife and David Young's wife, Kay, followed by David himself and our founder, Shirley. This next picture shows Janice Bonner, Judith Moles and the late Jill Gray. And in the last picture, Derek Dowse and Terry Keir. Quite a few pictures for 2006. This first one is Anne Barker, and that is followed by Derek Dowse, David Young and Ray Reedman. The next one is me and my wife. We're behind the flowers. Then of course there's Liz Rhodes with Sam Woollard, and he got his arm around her, of course, cheeky boy. And there's Will Waits, followed by Ray Reedman and Alan Primmer. And this one, Chrissy Holmes, is with David Young and Derek Dowse. And on her own here is Marion Bassett. And she is followed by Ann Taylor and David Young. And in the next one, Alan Primmer is talking to Beryl Rycraft. And then we have Terry Keir with Will Waits. Then Leslie Carver on her own. And Liz Rhodes again with Will Waits. Ray is seen here talking to Denise Large. I think that was the only reunion that she came to. And here is Shirley on her own, followed by Marion Bassett with her husband Lionel. At the back is Pat Horn with Shirley, Chrissy Holmes and Leslie. And here we have Ann Taylor with her good friend Pat Horn. Next we have Terry and Diane Keir. And on our next slide we have Ann Barker with Beryl's late husband Ramsay. And finally, on the last slide, we have Kay Young, Sam and Hilary, and Terry Keir. I'm sure you don't want to hear me droning on and on describing each picture, so I'm going to let them just run on. But 2009 was a special year. We had 17 pupils, plus their wives, and we held it on David Young's actually 70th birthday. Sorry, David. Jean Drury was so excited that she actually arrived a day early. Imagine that. We saw Joan Horth make her first visit since the inaugural do, and we also had Fred Cullingford with his wife for the first time. Sadly, it was to be the last time we saw Derek Dowse. Now I'll shut up and let you see the pictures while enjoying some good old 1950s rock and roll.
2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, join me home. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes 1. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes 2, 3 and 4, if the band slows down, we'll yell for more. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the chimes ring 5, 6 and 7, we'll be right in 7th heaven. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Oh, when it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 2, I'll be going strong and so will you. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. When the clock strikes 12, we'll cool off and start rocking around the clock again. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoe. Well, you can knock me down, step in my face, slander my name all over the place. Do anything that you wanna do, but honey, lay off of my shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoe. Yeah. You can burn my house, steal my car, drink my liquor from an old fruit jar. Do anything that you wanna do, but honey, lay off of my shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but lay off of my blue suede shoe.
2013 was a bad year for us. It was the smallest reunion ever, despite inviting Jennifer Jennings and Merv Lambert to join us. For a while, I thought that Terry Hunt, who owns Muppet's Cafe on Dovercourt High Street, would join us, but sadly he didn't make it. Will Waits did come, however, for his last visit, but it was plain to see that Parkinson's disease had weakened him. At the end we concluded that the next reunion would probably be the last one ever.
What do you want if you don't want money? What do you want if you don't want gold? Say what you want and I'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby. What do you want if you don't want Herman? What do you want if you don't want those? Say what you want and I'll give it you, darling. Wish you wanted my love, baby. Well, I'm offering you this heart of mine, but all you do is play it through. What do you want? Oh boy, you're making a fool of me. One of these days when you need my kissing, one of these days when you want me to, don't turn around, 'cause I'll be missing the thing you want to my love, baby. Well, I'm offering you a diamond ring, but all you do is turn me down. What do you want? Oh boy, you're going to down on me. One of these days when you need my kissing, one of these days when you want me to, don't turn around, 'cause I'll be missing then you want to my love, baby. Oh well, then you want to my love, baby.
Come on, everybody, clap your hands. Oh, you're looking good. I'm gonna sing my song. It won't take long. We're gonna do the twist, and it goes like this. Come on, let's twist again, like we did last summer. Yeah, let's twist again, like we did last year. Do you remember when things really hurt? Yeah, let's twist again. Christmas time is here. Round and round and up and down we go again. Oh baby, make me know you love me so. Let's twist again, like we did last summer. Come on, let's twist again, like we did last year. Twist. Who's that flying up there? Is it a bird? No. Is it a plane? No. Is it the twister? Yeah. Twist again, like we did last summer. Come on, let's twist again, like we did last year. Do you remember when things were really humming? Come on, let's twist again. Christmas time is here. Round and up and down we go again. Oh baby, make me know you love me so. Then come on, twist again, like we did last summer. Girl, let's twist again, like we did last year. Come on, let's twist again. Christmas time is here.
The success of the 2014 reunion gave us some hope, so we decided to try again, but this time without the guidance of our founder Shirley Carman. Instead, Jennifer Jennings threw her hat in the ring, pledging to find more ex-pupils from the class of 1951 to swell the numbers. Alas, that was not to be, and only Euphrasia James and Barbara Goshen, together with Davina Wright's sister Margaret, were added. However, 2016 did see the return of Bruno Clifford and Ken Hunter.
You got me singing the blues. The moon and stars no longer shine. The dream is gone, I thought was mine. There's nothing left for me to do but cry over you. Nothing more like running away.
While we look at some of these pictures of Dovercourt and Harwich in the past, let's just remember some of the class members who have already completed their journey through life. I mean, of course, friends such as Jill Gray, Tony Seymour, Norman Tyrrell, Dave Rocher, Donnie Marshall and John Flowerdew, who have all passed while we've been having these reunions. And let's also think about our friends with troubling illnesses, such as Alan Primmer, Bill Balaam, Liz Rhodes and Judith Moles. And lastly, those who have lost loved ones, and I include in that Beryl Rycraft, Bruno Clifford, Chrissy Holmes and Maureen Felgate. For some of us, it is the end of the reunions. There is little chance that me, Bruno, Ken Hunter and Ann Barker will ever make the journey to Dovercourt again. But David Young is determined to do his best to soldier on, and we wish him every success in his endeavours. And a final thank you to Shirley Carman for starting this whole thing off, because without her and her perseverance we would never ever have had these reunions. Thank you, Shirley.